Just checking. I actually did both. Just
Good
saying.
for you. All right, so we all have our new standard against which to measure ourselves. All right, here we go. So, as Carla just said, we are on chapter 18 tonight, week 21 of our study of the book of Revelation. For some of you, you're thinking, I never thought I would do 1 week of study of the book of Revelation, and here I am 21 weeks later. So congratulations. We don't have too much farther to go, and I think this is good. So let's see here. So starting at verse 1, after these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated from his glory. So once again, as we have seen over and over in the book of Revelation, after these things is kind of a technical term that John has been using. So if you ever read the Gospel of Mark, you'll see that Mark really likes to say, and immediately, and immediately. And you kind of have this pace. John in the book of Revelation keeps saying, after these things. So just remember that this refers to the order of John's visions, not a chronological order of events within history. So as we're reading this, don't start at chapter 1 and go to chapter 22 and think everything is sequential here. The visions are sequential, but the events are not. So this descending angel now may be the same one that we saw introduced back in chapter 17, verse 1. And John points out that this angel had great authority. The reason why John adds that is because he is confirming the validity of the angel's message of judgment. So the importance of John seeing this angel and the angel having this great authority, it's to confirm that the message of judgment is valid. And that's also why he talks about the aura of the glory of the angel. So again, that also undergirds the authority. At the very least, it means this is one that comes from God, is reflecting God's glory. So the earth shone with light from the glory. Now that's an allusion back to the book of Ezekiel, when Ezekiel sees this end time restoration of Israel to the land and the temple. So we are being alerted of what is coming over the horizon. That same background introduces the theme of the exhortation to God's true people to separate from the world and to be restored to the Lord. So it's this call of restoration. Now, this angel in his description may actually be a Christophany. So this may be Christ, not quite in disguise, but Christ in a different way than he has appeared to us so far in the book of Revelation. The portrayal, the reason why we say it may be a Christophany is because the portrayal that we get here is very similar to the luminous angelic appearance that we saw back in chapter 10, verse 1. And we said then that was likely a Christophany. So if this echo is echoing that, and that was Christ, then this too is a Christophany. This too is a vision of Christ. We could say that this is affirmed or confirmed by the ascription of glory, giving glory to this heavenly figure in Revelation. When glory is ascribed in the book of Revelation, it is either to God or to Christ. And we'll see in chapter 21, verse 23, that it is that glory of both God and the Lamb is what illumines the new creation. So what we have here is the desolation of Babylon preparing the way for God to dwell in the new creation. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. So the divine angel cries out in a strong voice, which again gives more authority to the announcement of Babylon's fall. So again, that's about authority. The authoritative nature of the announcement is emphasized in order to encourage readers that the message's fulfillment is certain. So that's why it's so repetitive. That's why it is stacking up that sense of authority, because John wants us to know that this is going to happen 100%, both about the salvation of God's people and about the destruction of the wicked in the world. So, what we are meant to see is that the angel is more glorious than Babylon, and the angel's authority is more compelling than Babylon's authority. His appearance and voice are meant to get the attention of those who are in danger of falling under Babylon's spell. So John is trying to hold the two up together. Babylon has boasted of her glory and her authority, but here we have a vision of true glory, true authority, and it is meant to wake us if we are falling under that spell. The encouragement is that God will judge the his people's persecutors. Babylon's judgment is so certain that only its results are narrated, and they're narrated in the past tense. So it is looking to the future, but it actually looking back to say it's so certain, it's in the past, in the future. So that's just a linguistic thing that is going on there. Just as the old Babylon was predicted to fall, and it did, this current world Babylon will as well. This is a historical pattern that will be fulfilled. So this verse 2, explains Babylon's desolate condition is a result coming from her judgment by God. God's judgment in Revelation reveals Babylon's true devilish nature, which was masked behind idolatry that was done in order to attract and to deceive her followers through the ages. So we have Isaiah 21:9 in the background. We have Jeremiah 27:39 describing Babylon's desolate condition after her judgment by linking idolatry with the demonic realm. So again, those two things are going hand in hand. Babylon's association with the devil, the beast, and the false prophet is made clear since they possess unclean spirits and demons. The destiny of that which is truly demonic, Babylon, can only be final judgment. The luxurious facade has been stripped away. So we are seeing the bones of Babylon, and it is the dwelling place of dead things. The demonic realm has been Babylon's guiding force. For all the nations have fallen because of the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich from the excessive wealth of her luxury. So the cause of her judgment is her idolatrous seduction of the nations and their rulers. Again, this is not literal immorality. This is figurative of the acceptance of Babylon's religious and idolatrous demands. The nations and the king's cooperation ensures their material security. So again, this is an economic interpretation rather than a sexual interpretation. Economic interpretation, and that's confirmed by Isaiah 23, 17, the second half of the verse, particularly in the Septuagint. She will be a market for all the kingdoms of the earth, it says. This is also strengthened by the concluding clause that the merchants became rich because of her power and her luxury. So this is talking about economics. Economic security would be removed from these people who have been cooperating with Babylon if they did not cooperate with her idolatry. So they drank refers to the willingness of society in the empire to commit itself to idolatry in order to maintain its economic security. And it's because of this that Babylon will be judged. The seduction and false economic security that it is promised, this was the peace of Rome. So again, Babylon is much bigger than Rome, but Rome is the current incarnation of it in John's day and time. So kings of the earth are not referring to simply or only Roman rulers, but to the whole elite ruling class who have benefited by cooperation with this political power. So it's not just the emperor, it's all of the leadership, all who benefit from this corrupt system. And we will see that causing the nations to trust her economic resources is an expression of Babylon's pride and a form of idolatry, which is answered by condemnation. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive any of her plagues." So now believers are exhorted to not participate in the idolatrous system based on Babylon's judgment for that idolatry. Babylon's sins and her punishment should cause genuine Christians to not be seduced by her, and thus they should refuse to cooperate in her evil ways. This is not being addressed to unbelievers, but to those within the confessing Christ community whom God calls my people. The call is patterned after the book of Isaiah and the book of Jeremiah, particularly Jeremiah 51:45. These prophets exhorted Israel to separate from Babylon's idolatry by leaving and returning to Israel at the time of restoration. It also echoes Isaiah 52, verse 11. The separation is prior to the judgment, and the call comes so that they may escape the coming judgment. Now, it's important to note here that this is only a spiritual separation. They are to refuse to compromise. Maybe I should say we are to refuse to compromise, but we need to remain in the world in order to witness, and our witness will bring about suffering for our testimony. So this isn't an escape to protect us physically. This isn't a physical come out of that city, go live off the grid where you're not around sin. No, we have been called to these places, but we have been called not to participate in those things. So participating in Babylon's sin is what would be problematic because it would make us unclean and would therefore disqualify us from entering into the holy city. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her offenses. So Babylon will be punished with plagues because her sins have reached up to heaven. This is an appeal to Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 9, where being lifted up means extreme corporate sin. And so we see that a lot in the Old Testament when God uses Israel to judge the other nations following the Exodus, for example. They are to move into the land and exterminate all those in the land because their sin has come to this fullness where God is acting and punishing using Israel, his tool, to do so. So it's the same idea here. The sin has reached a fullness and has reached up to heaven and has come up before God, and it must be dealt with. So God will remember her unrighteous acts because they have mounted up before him, and their presence in heaven is a reminder to him to punish these acts. Babylon has multiplied her sin, so God must multiply his judgments against her in order to maintain his justice. So just keep that in mind. This isn't God being capricious or malicious. God's justice must match the human sin. Pay her back even as she has paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mixed, mix twice as much for her. So the imperative to render, to pay her back, um, give to, could be directed to God's human or angelic agents of retribution. That might be the 10 kings or the beast that we saw earlier. They could be in mind, or it could be the my people that was referenced a moment ago, meaning give a prophetic witness that would inflict punishment ahead of the judgment. And there, chapter 11, verse 3 to 6, remember the two witnesses there embody the witness of the whole church of God's people. Likely, God himself is included as he is the one who dispenses Babylon's judgment. So the implicit judgment of verse 5 is now clarified here. Babylon's punishment is commensurate with her crime. I didn't want to get into all of the Greek text and that kind of thing. You might ask the question, well, but this is said pay her double and mix twice as much for her. There are other translations of the same bit of Greek which does not conclude that this is a call for double, but rather has that same principle of the punishment matching the crime. So I'll just leave that there. We don't need to get too deep into that. To the extent that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, to that same extent give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. So again, this principle of the punishment fitting the crime is in operation here. To the same degree that she glorified herself, to that same degree give her torment and mourning. So it's not more and it's not less, it is just. So it's a balanced scale. She will be punished to the same degree that she has sinned in obtaining that glory and that luxury. Her sin is pride and self-sufficiency. It is a self-glorification which is sinful because only glory should be given to God, not to oneself. So this divine punishment is not simply justice, although it is justice, but it is God's response to sin. This is God punishing sin by means of that sin. So the punishment described is based on historical Babylon's judgment back in Isaiah chapter 47, verse 7 to 8. Babylon sees herself as a mother who has confidence that she will always have her children's support, but her economic and political security is going to be removed suddenly. Her confidence in this security will be shown to have no foundation and is ultimately, it is self-idolatry, which has to be judged. So the church has to beware trusting the economic security of these world systems, or its members, the church's members, will be judged along with the world. For this reason, in one day, her plagues will come, plague and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for the Lord God who judges her is strong. So the political and economic arrogance is emphasized as the cause for Babylon's sudden destruction. Again, we have an allusion to Isaiah 47. Judgment will come because God is able to carry it out. He is strong. He has the power. So that's part of what's under there. She will be burned by fire is almost a repeat verbatim of chapter 17, verse 16. So it develops the prophecy of the beast and his allies turning against the economic religious system of Babylon and destroying it. So God puts it into their hearts to annihilate Babylon, making them agents of God who judges her. Also notice again punishment fitting the crime when we have famine there as well, because so often that's what was happening to God's people in their persecution. And the kings of the earth who committed acts of sexual immorality and lived luxuriously with her will weep and mourn over her when they see the smoke of her burning. The angel who spoke in verses 4 to 8 continues to speak in verses 9 to 20. The earthly rulers express despair in response to Babylon's destruction. And again, that echoes Jeremiah 51. They weep because they have lost their lover. The idolatrous involvement allowed the kings of the earth to live in luxury. Idolatry and economic prosperity are linked in John's time in the allegiance to Caesar and the patron gods of the trade guilds. This was essential to maintain good standing in the trades. You had to offer sacrifices to those gods. So local and regional political leaders had to support that system in order to keep their offices and to keep the economic benefits that came with their high positions. So you're getting paid really well because you have managed to buy yourself into that high position, and you're going to make a lot of money because you're in it. But then you have to play the political game. You've got to offer those sacrifices in order to keep that place, in order to keep that wealth. They become despondent, these ones, when they see the smoke of Babylon's burning. Again, we have an echo here of Sodom and Gomorrah. We have an echo of the judgment on Edom from the Old Testament. They lament because Babylon's destruction means their own loss of economic standing and power. Smoke and burning are already a part of the description of final judgment of those who follow the beast, those who sell their soul for their economic well being. So the two judgments, this one here and the one back in chapter 14, verses 9 to 11, are part of the same punishment. We're looking at the same thing from a different angle of vision. Followers of the beast will mourn over fallen Babylon because this entails their own imminent judgment. They may not perceive that that is what's happening, and they may not perceive that worse than just their material loss lays before them. Standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, "Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come." Now the kings lament because Babylon's loss is their own loss economically. This is paralleled in the language of verses 15 and the first part of verse 16 in a little bit. So here we have what the kings say as they weep and lament. It's broken out for us. Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, because in 1 hour your judgment has come. Awe is not only for the severity of the judgment, because this is a form of awe they're crying out, but this awe is also because of the suddenness with which it occurs. I mean, imagine if the United States of America was somehow swept away overnight. You woke up tomorrow morning and America is wiped off the map. We would not just sit there and go, wow. We would be like, how could something so big, so fearsome, so strong be wiped away so quickly? It's that same kind of an idea here. So it's because of the suddenness, not just the severity. And the last phrase means that they perceive Babylon's doom as God's judgment. For in 1 hour your judgment has come. So they recognize that this is the judgment of God. This could underlie their lament as they fear that the same judgment that Babylon has received, they are going to receive because of their participation in Babylon. Calling Babylon great and strong reveals the idolatrous nature of Babylon, since the words belong to God alone. So again, remember the beast has all sorts of blasphemous names written on it. It's the same kind of idea here, ascribing what belongs to God alone to something earthly, to something human, especially in judgment. It is God who we saw a moment ago is strong and so therefore can bring this judgment. So verses 8 and 10 are intentionally contrasted using almost identical phrases. They are mourning the strength of the great city because it was their political power base. So it's more appropriate that the merchants and the mariners mourn the loss of wealth by the great city because it provided an economic power base. So that's why it's appropriate for them to mourn. The quickness of Babylon's demise is emphasized by the repetition of the phrase, just 1 hour. We're going to hear that. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargo anymore. So now the merchants join the kings in mourning over Babylon. They weep because no one buys their cargo anymore. Babylon has been the primary customer of the merchants' products, and that resulted in them becoming rich from her. So her destruction and her removal means that there are no longer buyers for their goods. So they lament over their own economic loss. Cargo of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every article of ivory, and every article made from very valuable wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, perfume, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, and cargo of horses, carriages, slaves, and human lives. So we receive this list of trade products, which is just representative. It's not exhaustive. It just represents in order to show that the cargo, this precious, valuable cargo, will not be purchased by Babylon's economic system any longer. The items in the beginning of the list were applied to the personification of Babylon. Remember the woman who was dressed, that whore, the harlot. So she was a personification. She was dressed and she had these items arrayed on her dress back in 1704 in order to show that what we are talking about is the economic trading system. So Babylon's economic attractiveness, again, that garb, that dressing, her economic attractiveness caused the kings and the merchants to have commercial intercourse with her. And this included the cooperation with the idolatrous religious structure of the trade system. So again, you have to be a participant in the system of gods and offerings in order to be a part of this commerce network. Without that, you would be outside of it and it would be to your detriment. So the list that we have here is based in part on Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 7 to 27. Although, again, not all the items are found in Ezekiel. Those which are not found, presumably, they represent items of trade in John's own time, and so represents part of the Roman trading system. The products are chosen because they represent luxury products, which Rome overindulged in with an extravagant and idolatrous manner. So again, just engaging in that level of luxury itself is an example of idolatry in and of itself. So the land merchants and the sea merchants, their loss has received more description in order to get the attention of the churches who are in danger of compromising economically. So go back to chapters 2 and 3. Don't lose sight of who's hearing and reading this letter. It is the 7 churches in Asia Minor. There's a lot of pressure. Some people have started to compromise. So this is the clanging bell warning them that they don't want to be standing on the shore with these folks weeping and mourning because they got caught up in the wrong system. The fruit you long for has left you, and all things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and people will no longer find them. So the judgment from verses 9 to 11 is repeated here again for emphasis. The fruit that your soul desires. This expresses the core of Babylon's being. It is committed to satisfying herself with economic wealth instead of desiring God's glory. It is determined, her very being is determined to satisfy her own economic wealth rather than pursuing or desiring God's glory. So the destruction of Babylon means a destruction of all that it purchased from the merchants. Since these things perished, people will no longer be able to find these things in Babylon. There's an alliteration in the costly and splendid things that could be translated as bright things, these bright things. And it suggests a false glitter, a false glory that was Babylon's wealth. And even that false glitter and glory will be taken away, and it is ultimately to be replaced by the divine glory and the divine brightness, which is reflected in God's own end time people, and God's own end time city, and God's own end time sun. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning. Again, repeated is the merchants gained wealth from Babylon. They stand at a distance in fear of torment and they mourn. This is all repeated. It's all been said in verses 9 to 11 already. So it's this repetition which is underscoring the sense of devastating judgment of this economic system. John wants us to feel it, how deep this goes, and the loss of it brings to those who depend on it. So we used America as an example there a moment ago. We wake up tomorrow morning and America's gone. Canada and a lot of the world are in trouble. It's the same kind of thing here. Saying, woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. So the first part of the merchant's cry is the same as that of the kings in verse 10. The second part concerns the clothing of the personified city. And here it substitutes for the strength from verse 10, meaning her strength is defined as her wealth. Babylon's strength is Babylon's wealth. So the religious facet of the economic system is expressed through the woman's clothing. Again, that reflects the clothes of the high priest when we see this description, adorned with gold, with purple, with scarlet, with linen, and with precious stones. These same words were used in chapter 17, verse 4, and they were used in verse 6 of chapter 18, and that was for the harlot's attire. So this description of the harlot city contrasts with Christ's own pure bride and city in chapter 21, verse 1 and verses 10 to 23 that we'll see later. There, the bride, the city will be adorned with every kind of precious stone and with gold, as well as the 12 stones based on the high priest's garments. So this contrast between the two, the harlot and the bride, suggests that God's true people, the bride, are separated from those in the Christian community who have compromised, effectively becoming a part of the pagan system. So again, the similarity of description of the whore indicates that there is compromise by those even within the church. First part of verse 17, for in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste. So this is the third refrain of the woe from verse 10. And it's interpreted again economically. In 1 hour, such great wealth is laid waste. So the basis of the woe is Babylon's economic prosperity, which has been destroyed. This means the merchants' prosperity will also be destroyed. If Babylon's economic prosperity has perished so quickly, so will theirs, because theirs depends on hers. So their perception of this imminent and swift fall is the true cause for lament. In other words, it's selfishly motivated. They don't really care about the city, they care about themselves. And every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor and all who make their living by the sea stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe, the great city, in which all who had ships at sea became rich from her prosperity, for in 1 hour she has been laid waste. So again, more emphasis is made on the detrimental effects of Babylon's fall for her dependents, for those who depend on her. And again, this is done by using the art of repetition of that same lament and language from verse 9. So now the maritime agents who carried the merchants' goods also weep along with the kings and the merchants for the same selfish reasons that the merchants mourned. The focus is on the wealthy maritime merchants. They have ships and so became rich. So what we have in view here is the ship owners. They throw dust on their heads. Now, dust on their heads biblically often marks out repentance, but here we don't have a description of repentance. This is simply an expression of sorrow for their own coming destruction. Verse 19 repeats the woe from verse 10 and from verse 16 once again. So we interpret the strong city economically. She's so strong, which is why they became rich from her wealth. The last clause here emphasizes once more that the suddenness of Babylon's demise is the cause of this lament. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. Those in heaven and the saints, the apostles, the prophets are called on to rejoice because God will judge Babylon. Presumably, this is the same angel speaking that was introduced in verse 1. The addressees are those who are in heaven and those on earth, which represents the totality of believers, although angelic beings are probably also included. As the saints were commanded to rejoice in chapter 12, verse 12, over the victory over Satan, now they are commanded to rejoice because of victory over the entire satanic system. Here we have an allusion again to Jeremiah 51, which refers to heaven and earth to mean the whole of the Israelite community. So again, the whole of God's people. The whole Christian community is in mind, not just select groups Not just those in Asia Minors, but you and I too, my friends. Um, the whole is represented by the saints, the apostles, and the prophets. And that's in contrast to the church or to the earth dwellers. And the grounds for rejoicing is because God judged your judgment from her. God has given judgment for you against her, or God has pronounced judgment on her, the judgment she passed on you. There's some ambiguity in the translation there. Babylon judged the believers by shedding their blood. So now we rejoice over the essential justice of the judgment. So again, it is no more, it is completely equal to the level of sin. This is not a heavy judgment, this is a balanced judgment. Um, and so our rejoicing is that her sin has been judged well. So we rejoice over her bloodshed because it is for the same amount of blood that they spilled of God's people. So the suffering saints who cried out for vengeance in chapter 6, verses 9 to 11, is now at the center of this rejoicing community. Their call for God's justice has been fulfilled. So the focus here is on the successful outcome of God's justice, which shows the integrity of the Christian's faith and character, not the suffering of Babylon. So this isn't about rejoicing over the suffering of Babylon. This is about the rejoicing over God giving justice to his people who have suffered. This demonstrates God's own integrity. So God will judge Babylon as severely as she persecuted others. Again, this makes the punishment fit the crime. This is why those who suffered her persecution are the very ones called now to rejoice. Together with chapter 19, verses 1 to 5, this is the climax of the response of the saints' cry for vindication. So, this rejoicing is not coming out of a selfish spirit of revenge, like, ha ha, we got them, but rather this is a rejoicing out of the fulfilled hope that God has defended the honor of his name by not leaving sin unpunished, and he has shown that his people are in the right, and he has overturned the wrong verdict that the ungodly world laid against them and punished them for, much like Jesus. So even the saints rejoicing is correspondent to the sin of the wicked system, which was glad over the death of the two witnesses. Think back to chapter 11 and how people sent gifts to one another because the witness of the church had seemingly been annihilated, and they rejoiced, they praised. So this rejoicing is even commiserate with that. Then a strong Then a strong angel picked up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will never be found again. So the judgment of Babylon and the devastating effects are repeated once again, differently now, to emphasize the twofold theme that came out of verses 9 to 20. The judgment of Babylon is expressed now in a parable. We have a vision of an angel lifting a large millstone and casting it into the sea. That picture is based on Jeremiah chapter 51. Jeremiah's servant ties a stone around a book which contains a prophecy of Babylon's coming judgment, and he throws that into the Euphrates River. So here, the angel interprets his action to mean in the same manner that Babylon the Great will be thrown down and will not be found any longer. It will disappear from view. The historical judgment of Babylon typifies the fall of the final world kingdom. Jesus also uses the same kind of language in Matthew chapter 18, verse 6, where he says, whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it would be better if a millstone was tied around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. So this is a fulfillment of Jesus's own participation in that same judgment language. So then this is being directed against those who might deceive, particularly within the Christian community. Those teachers who want to say, no, it's okay to compromise with the culture in order to get along, we've got to go along. So this is a warning for those who might want to deceive within the church. Those guilty in the church should take warning, or else they will suffer Babylon's own fate. And the sound of harpists, musicians, flute players, and trumpeters will never be heard in you again, and no craftsman of any craft will ever be found in you again. And the sound of a mill will never be heard in you again, and the light of a lamp will never shine in you again, and the voice of the groom and the bride will never be heard in you again. Verses 5 to 7 and verse 20 says that the judgment that God gives on Babylon suits Babylon's crime. So now these verses that we have here on your screen show how the punishment fits the crime using text from Jeremiah and from Ezekiel. Babylon's economic system persecuted Christian communities by ostracizing them from the trade guilds because they didn't worship the trade guild's patron deities. This resulted in a loss of economic standing, which resulted in poverty for those who were ostracized from the guilds. This meant removal of Christian artisans from the marketplace and removal of common pleasures of life that were enjoyed in normal economic times. So, as the Babylonians removed Christian workers from the marketplace, so God will remove Babylon's loyal workers. No artisan of any craft will be found in you again. In verse 24, we have a list of Babylon's persecution of the saints as part of the basis for Babylon's judgment in verses 21 to 23. There is wordplay in verse 24. Blood was found. And then here in these verses, by no means will these things be found. In other words, nothing will be found in Babylon in the future because the blood of the saints were found in her in the past. Nothing will be found in her in the future because the blood of the saints was found in her in the past. So, as the means to make a living was removed from believers, now it will be taken from Babylon. The sound of a mill will not be heard in you again, or a lamp shine in you again. The pleasures of economic prosperity was taken from God's people by economic and political persecution. Now the sound of harpists and musicians and flutists and trumpeters will not be heard in you again. The voice of the bridegroom and the bride will not be heard in you again. Babylon, who removed the joys of life from the saints, will have her pleasures taken away. Babylon's persecution was selective in John's day, but he foresees a time when she would attempt to exterminate the Christian community completely. And so God punishes her for her attempt to annihilate his people by overthrowing her entirely. For your merchants were the powerful people of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your witchcraft. The angel's pronouncement of devastation continues, giving here and in verse 24 3 reasons that Babylon must be cast down and not be found anymore. First of all, because her merchants were the great ones of the earth. Isaiah 23:8 says that the merchants and the glorious princes of the earth are the glorious princes of the earth. So these are the great ones here, these merchants. With the supported system to be judged because they gave glory to themselves and not to God. This self-glorification, being the mighty people of the earth, is the first basis for their condemnation. Second, they are going to be punished because Babylon influenced the nations to worship idols through sorcery, not the practice of black magic, but rather the deception of the people. Compare that to Isaiah chapter 47, verse 9. Remember, fornication isn't about sex. It is a metaphor for idolatry in the book of Revelation. So that's the second reason. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. So third, God will chasten the ungodly community because it persecuted the community of the faithful. God will persecute them because they persecuted God's people, the blood of the prophets and saints and all the slain of the earth. This is the same reason the historical Babylon ended. They slayed Israel. Check out Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 49. This description could also literally be referring to the Christian martyrs. However, it's best to take it as figurative. Slaughtered the people on the earth as all sorts of persecutions and death throughout time and history. So just a concluding word here. Wealth is not the reason for God's judgment of Babylon. Rather, it's the arrogant use of that wealth and the trust that it placed in the security that that wealth brought. Because that is tantamount to idolatry. When we think we are so self-sufficient, we no longer need to reference God. That's idolatry. We have made that wealth our God. Throughout chapters 16 to 18, there have been descriptions of the city of Sodom, Gomorrah, Babylon, Tyre, Nineveh, Edom, and Jerusalem. Each of these have been applied to the ungodly system that trusts only in itself. All of these Old Testament oracles are now applied to Rome, but not just to Rome, not just to this one satanic nation. Rather, it refers to this corporate, depraved, worldwide system that spans the ages from the cross to the final parousia. In John's day, the Roman Empire just happened to represent that wicked system. Okay. Do we have any questions coming out of that chapter?
Just an observation, Pastor David. Is there a significance to what John was saying in verse 8? You know, he makes reference to it in one day, plagues are going to overtake her. And then on the ongoing clarifications, it's in 1 hour, in 1 hour, in 1 hour. So wonder why was that?
In both of them, it is just signifying how sudden that it happens. And then when it switches to 1 hour and it keeps repeating that, that's just intensifying that sense of suddenness.
Just
Yeah, so it's ratcheting up the tension.
yeah, it just seemed kind of odd. Like all the other verses were in 1 hour, but he starts off in 1 day.
Yeah.
It's just,
yeah.
I don't know. It just seemed a little. I thought maybe there was more to it, but it's
Yeah,
just ratcheting up.
Yeah, again, it may also have to do with the allusions, right? Verse 8 is alluding to Isaiah 47:9. And some of the other ones are alluding to Jeremiah in places, other parts of Isaiah. So it may be that John is borrowing the language from those particular Old Testament oracles or prophecies and just bringing them into his day. But again, they're meaning the same. The suddenness of action that is almost breathtaking and um, beyond comprehension. I mean, we've seen wind or storms here in Saskatchewan in our 7 years when we kind of look and think, well, I can't believe that happened overnight kind of thing. So it's that same kind of suddenness and almost impossibility that is being communicated. Good question.
Well, I had some questions or comments or thoughts, I guess, more on the chapter from last week in the book,
Okay.
which
Yep.
relates to this chapter. And I guess, I mean, we're living in Babylon now, would be the sense that I get from his chapter. And this makes perfect sense to me now. I'm really glad you did this, Dave. It's, a lot of things are sort of starting to fall into place a little bit.
Oh, good.
No, good. But, you've talked about how in John's time it was Rome, and you've given some examples of, the way people were being led astray and so on.
Yep.
And he talks about some things, starts on page 302, I guess, and he gives, I guess, 7 examples of what living in today's Babylon can kind of be like.
Yes,
and I
so
wondered,
we're now talking about Discipleship on the Edge, our book.
yes, right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Go ahead.
So I just wondered if we could kind of talk a little bit about some examples, practical examples, maybe of today's world and where we need to be careful. I
Yes.
think, I mean, I know some of it's your own discernment for each person.
Yes.
But it doesn't hurt to have a second opinion or a more expert opinion, which we're all looking at
Right.
you now when I say that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that struck me was from your sermon on Sunday, where you talked about functional atheists.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're all, putting myself in this category, guilty of being functional atheists without realizing exactly at the time what we're doing.
Right.
And for me, it's more about wanting to do what I want to do when I want to do it, and don't tell me what to do.
There's some of that going around. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now and let you carry on.
Okay. So you referenced page 302 and it goes on to 303, the 7 marks of Babylon. So leaving the living God out of the equation. So that's that functional atheism. Now, we just need to be careful because, like all sin, there will be moments where we do something and we've taken no thought of God. So what we want to point to is a habitual doing that, leaving God out of the equation. So if we turn to our world, and I mean, Babylon in what we've been looking at doesn't get to claim ignorance. It is responsible and accountable. Doesn't get to say, "Oh, I didn't know." So, in our world today, are there places where God is being left out of the equation?
No. Well, how about just about everywhere?
There's a few heads nodding. Okay. Sensuality. So again, Johnson does a good job of recognizing that this is not necessarily speaking about a literal sexuality, but is pointing towards products are sold by appeal to sex drive, so they are related. Lines of basic morality are crossed until a network can be put on at 9 p.m. a program wherein a sexual encounter with a prostitute is accompanied by the singing of Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm, all is bright. All over the world, in homes and schools and shops, music videos play day and night celebrating sensuality. So, is there anywhere that we are seeing this relationship between sex and product in our lives? How caught up are we in those things? Injustice. We have the selling of slaves. So we saw the list, the ship's manifest for the merchants. And that included bodies and souls. Are there bodies and souls being sold in our world today?
We have in our home when we're watching TV, there are certain commercials that come up that we are not comfortable with, and we have the remote very handy, and so we block out those commercials. We turn the thing off, and I'm seeing that we are watching fewer and fewer commercials because there are more and more commercials that we find offensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And often it's, trying to sell things with sex. It's attitudes that are ungodly. So it's there, and it's very
Well,
prevalent.
and Ed and Linda work very conscientiously in Saskatchewan. They've done work to keep strip clubs out of Regina at the very least, and to, if not shut down body rub parlors altogether, at least make them safer and less accessible, I think. Is that right, Ed?
Yeah, well, we've done what we can, but
Yeah.
we need to keep running into a brick wall there, but we won't
Absolutely.
stop. Yeah.
But there's places within our neighborhoods, not far from our homes, where bodies and souls are being sold.
Yeah, that's right.
So that would be an example. I think the work that we've done with, no, I don't want to put it that way. I think issues of injustice that are in the mainstream, Black lives, Indigenous lives, women, are all examples of injustice and people's souls that are and bodies that are at risk. Worship of products. So James K.A. Smith has a book called Imagining the Kingdom. And there have been times in Christian education where I've actually read a chapter, and he actually frames up the modern going into a mall, and he puts it all in religious terms. And it is incredible to see the relationship between shopping malls and churches as places of worship. So I want to say there's that. Something that Carla has brought forward at different times is the relationship of the products and the bodies and souls, the injustice, being aware of where those products come from, because it is not harmless. Violence, constantly preparing for war. Feel like we see that. Deception and counterfeit. I think that we see some of these things. I think of 2008, the market crash, and we've had other things happen. The Great Depression, where people are jumping off, and it seems to me there's often a cycle there of a certain death and then resurrection. We got to make this thing come back again, because ultimately our security is in that stuff. So as I was working through chapter 18 this week, I was thinking about in the market crash that led to the Great Depression, people jumping out of windows and that kind of thing, because they were ruined. Their lives were over, and they couldn't face it. And I was thinking like the merchants standing and crying out, "Whoa, whoa," because everything they had invested in that. So I think, I was kind of keenly aware and wondering, well, what happens if everything that we've invested in, Sarah and I have pensions through our jobs and that kind of thing. If that was to go south, would we be ruined? Would we be devastated? Would we be mourning? And is there a caution in here for us? And I
You
want to
could
be
come-
careful.
You could come
Yes.
and live with us if that happened, though.
Lovely. Lovely.
That's
Yes,
been recorded, Dave,
that's correct. Yeah, I
remember.
do get by with a little help from my friends. And then this idolatry. And I really think, tonight we hit on the idea that this sense of self-security is not just a functional atheism, but is actually is a form of idolatry. It's not just leaving God out of it, it is replacing God with something that we can control. We have made idols so that we don't have to rely on God. And that is, a couple of years ago, working through the book, The Witness of Preaching by Thomas Long. He had this wonderful quote that I wrote down, and I've used it in sermons a couple of times, where he says, Israel kept going back to the Baal and the Asherah pole, not because Israel were particularly wicked, but because Baal and Asherah were far more available and guaranteed Israel what she wanted rather than Yahweh, which could remain silent, and because he was sovereign, would only respond when he wanted to respond. So idolatry at its very heart is like witchcraft. It is the attempt to control things. So where in our lives do we attempt to force control, attempt to make our desired outcome happen, irrespective to God? And we will find the heart of our personal idolatry laying there. I think within the church, there are cultural things that we are being pressured to adopt in order to, again, go along to get along. I have heard people say things like, if we want to continue to grow, or we want to have people come to church, then we need to X, Y, or Z. As soon as we've done that, we are starting to compromise with the culture. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to have a 16th century Reformed understanding of the church or older. There are things, I mean, ours is a living faith, and we should always be searching the scripture and asking, what does it mean to live authentically in our particular time, in our particular place, and to respond to what we hear of the Spirit and what we are reading in scripture. Those two things are not separated. We hear the voice of the Spirit through scripture, and we read scripture through the voice of the Spirit. And we need to respond. So things should change. So, I'm not saying we got to go back to patriarchy. Not at all. It is quite clear that was part of that satanic system of old, and it needed to be changed. Does that help?
Yes, I'm still thinking about it all. I mean, part of me is, I think it's easy to I'm just going to say the words and whatever. Easy to kind of become extreme and go, okay, I need to, stop watching TV, never go to the movies again, sell all that I have, and just trust that God's going to take care of me.
Yes.
I think you can go too far crazy that way as well. So there's a
Absolutely.
tension there.
So what we heard tonight, come out of her, my people, I really stressed this isn't a physical abandonment of the world system. There's no way we can do it. Where do we have to go? We are in the world.
Are there any
So
convents left?
we were never, well, even the convents are in the world, as we see from the
Yeah.
different sex scandals and all that kind of stuff that happens in every denomination and form of Christendom. We cannot escape the world. So it's kind of a false thing that we talk about, but the emphasis here is don't participate in those things. And I think, it would be so much easier if we just had a nice, clear checklist. Do these things, don't do these things. But what we have is this warning. And now there are certain rules, certain things. I mean, the ethical Torah is still in effect on us as Christians. There is still a life of obedience that we are called to. Discipleship means something. But like so many things, we are given the parameters and told to live faithfully in those ways. And that's probably why we need to have this. I mean, all throughout, particularly the New Testament, what we have is this call back to faithfulness. Hey guys, this is what it means. And in every age of the church, when we've done history of Christianity, we see this recall to renewal, because we veer off course, which is why it's so important to continue to abide in Christ. And I would think abiding in Christ at the very least means abiding in the Word, understanding what's being said, and as a community in the community of the Spirit, wrestling with the implications for us today.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, we have to avoid extremes. This is not a call to get rid of, all of your pensions and stocks and anything like that. This is just, are you paying attention? Is this where your security and your trust is? If this were to all go up in smoke tomorrow, do you know, and are you expecting to rely on your Heavenly Father for your daily bread and to meet your needs, and that you can continue on, you don't despair, and you can continue not just to care for yourself, but for your neighbor as well. Woo-hoo.
I think that may be the clearest that you have ever explained that before. You've tried to explain that whole acquiring wealth and where's the line and poverty and all of that, but the way you just summarized it in those words was just, I mean, I've always understood it, but just to kind of, the way you just said, would you be able to trust or know that you would be able to rely on God for your daily bread, but also would you despair and would you be able to continue to move on, I think is so key
Yeah.
to understanding where your line of acquiring wealth, so to speak, is. Because like you said, there is no clear cut definition. You can have, $1,000 in your bank account and not $1,001, or it isn't that, but I feel like it's always what's behind it. What are you doing with that wealth? What is your attitude towards that wealth? Are you thanking God for that wealth and recognizing that it's not your wealth, it's his wealth that he's given to you? I like the way
Yes.
you summarized that. So anyway,
good.
yeah.
Good thing it got recorded because I have no idea what I said.
I know. I often think about that when you're preaching on Sundays. It must be really odd for you to hear yourself preach. And I giggled to myself when you commented, "Oh, I should have said this," and I was going to write something sarcastic, but I decided not
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Yeah. Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
So, let's see here. Let me share the screen again. We're just about at time, but is there maybe a question in this week's chapter that we want to wrestle with? And of course, this
Question.
chapter applies to next week's chapter. Go ahead, Michelle.
I sort of struggled with question 4, which was why is the imagery of the bride key for our discipleship?
Okay.
I couldn't really answer that. I mean, other than, obviously, the imagery of the church as Christ's bride, I understand that, but
Mhm.
the discipleship part maybe.
Yeah. So Michelle's question or question 4, why is this idea, we're not just servants, we're not just friends, we're not just children, we are the bride of Christ. Why is that important? How does that impact our discipleship?
One thing I think it tells us is that, you're not just saved and you're done, that there's an engagement and there's preparation, and that's what discipleship is yes, we're saved, but then we become disciples because we are preparing for
Yes.
that feast in the sky.
For the wedding, then for the marriage.
What? Others?
I was thinking in regards to that, the part where he talks about in the chapter, and I did kind of read the last few pages a bit quick because I was running out of usable time before dinner, but about the importance of, and he talks about his family, about his wife. His wife is significantly, more important than lots of other relationships, and so the bride or the spouse being the most significant relationship and the relationship you should put the most work into.
Yeah, that's good.
I do have to say that I struggled with that a little bit as I was reading it. I mean, I get I get the point, I guess, that like Sarah just said, to put the work into the relationship, but I often struggle with like parent and spouse, right? Like it was like, don't ever tell me I had to pick, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I struggled with that part of that, talking about that, because I thought that you could just as easily make the parent-child comparison.
Yeah.
And I had another thought and it just left me again.
Nargles.
I was gonna say because maybe because being a parent isn't necessarily a choice, like it's instinctual almost, as opposed to a spouse as a choice. Maybe
Right.
there's something there, but yeah.
Okay.
And I liked, actually, I really like that question because it makes you think, because the church is the bride and the church is us, we're the people. And so that links it all together. I mean, the bridegroom, and now who's he marrying? He's marrying us. And he wants to have that relationship with us. We're special. And so when you look at it that way, and then like what Carla said, if you look at husband and wife now and that how special that relationship is, well, now just ramp it up to the 100th degree, and you have God now and his bride. I think it's a beautiful picture. So
Well, for myself, as I was thinking about that, to me, it really changes the dynamic, particularly of sin. And I think Johnson touches on that. Sin, then, if that becomes a primary metaphor for who we are in our relationship with God, then sin is much more than just a violation of some sort of a code. That this is a betrayal at the deepest level of the lover of our soul, the one who will never give us up. And so I think that call to always be preparing, we talked last year in the discipleship study that, in the church today, the emphasis has been so much on getting people to become a Christian that discipleship might never come up. Just getting them in is all we really want. And then we can spend the rest of our lives trying to get them to be a disciple, but it's understood as a self-selecting kind of thing. Well, I'm okay this way, I'm saved. I don't need to be discipled. But if we change the metaphor and we say, okay, coming to Christ is like a woman coming to her husband, then being faithful is not an option. I mean, I guess she can be a bad spouse, but ideally, she should be pure and for her husband in the same way that he is to be pure and for her as well. So I just thought that was helpful in my own thinking around discipleship, that it's not about this rule or code, it's about fidelity, honoring the marriage commitment between us, the bride, and Christ, our bridegroom. And so all that language of giving her the linen and she made herself ready, I thought was really helpful. That dynamic of both God working to purify us, as well as us working to be pure for Christ, to be ready as his bride.
The other thing that hit me as you were talking just now is that love is an action. It's not a feeling.
Yes.
So it's something you do. So that
Yes.
kind of feeds into that for me as well.
Yes.
That it's more
And
than just, I'm saved, that's it. I can just forget about everything else and I'm
I
good to
think
go.
where the love is directed, so much of our culture likes to talk about love, but it's really talking about self-love. This is a love that is directed to the other, the lover of our soul. So it really does change the dynamic. In our culture, anything goes as long as we baptize it in that word, right? So think of some of the romantic literature or storylines on television and movies. Why did you break your marital vows and pursue a relationship with, well, we just loved each other. It just happened. Really, that's a selfish love. A real expression of love keeps the fidelity, honors the other, the one who it has married to, given itself to. It keeps its promises.
Mhm.
And I think that's a very different way to look at it that is becoming more and more unique in our day and age and culture because it is directed outside of ourselves. And of course, like Jesus says in the Gospels, those who lose their lives for my sake will find their lives. When we give ourselves up to the love for the other, to Christ, then we find ourselves through that very act, and we are loved and fulfilled in ways that the culture and its promises can never fulfill. Again, because that self-love, that's really the idolatry that we've been looking at in the book of Revelation.
Mm.
Well, it is 8:36, my friends. I feel like Sarah is angry at me for never giving her the opportunity to pray for our group. So I'm going to rectify that tonight. And I'm going to love my wife and honor her by allowing her to pray for our group.
Wow. And you think you're safe because you're separated by a level, but I got a posse upstairs that'll probably, tickle you silly later.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm
I just
safe.
wanna,
The laundry is not finished and the dishes aren't finished, so I'm not going anywhere soon.
um, it's funny. It's actually probably a good thing that you asked me. While we were meeting a ways back, one of my colleagues texted me, and she was letting me know she won't be at work tomorrow, and she normally does my lunchroom, so that someone was taking her place. And so I thanked her for letting me know, and